Hi everyone, welcome to the Car Chat podcast. I'm Sam Moores, and with me today I have Mark Harrison. Hello.
Hi Sam, you right?
Yeah, good. Can you tell the audience a little bit about sort of who you are, what you do?
Yeah, well, I'm not famous like a lot of your guests, but I guess maybe I'm interesting because I've been in the car business for, I guess, 25 years now, mainly in PR, but in the last few years more in the sort of commercial side of things. So I'm now at Praga, but I've worked at places like Rimac and Pininfarina in recent years. Before that, McLaren. Before that, BMW and Mini in places. So I've been around the block, but mainly premium and luxury end of the business. And
Okay.
so that's
How did this journey start? Did you always want to work in cars? What did you do? How did this work? This sort of
well,
pan out?
I guess what's interesting about that is as we speak, Praga is leading the truck category of the Dakar at the moment, and
Oh, really?
the reason to mention that is I actually got into the car business through working on the Camel Trophy back in the mid-90s. And Camel Trophy, I guess, was sort of Land Rover's attempt at the Dakar back in the day.
Yeah.
And I was actually a landscape architect. But
Oh, right.
I was freelance, and a friend, we were in a pub one night in Fulham, and she just needed people to go and help in what was called a press office in Central
Yeah.
America in Camel Trophy 1995. I thought I quite like the idea of 8 weeks in the jungle and in Belize and Central America. I've got no idea what a press office is, but
Yeah.
it was explained to me and it sounded very easy. It was just looking after a few journalists.
Yeah.
And so I went out on that, and that was with Tony Jardine's PR agency, Jardine PR. So a lot of your listeners and viewers will know Tony from, I guess,
Yeah.
Goodwood Festival Speed Rally section. He's the commentator there in Formula One and things. And so on the way back from that, Tony just basically said, if you ever want a job, just pick up the phone. And then I guess it was about 6 months later, I got a call from him. I like football as well as cars, and they just won Honda's sponsorship. It shows how long ago it was. Honda was sponsoring Manchester United, and they'd just
Right.
won the account to run that sponsorship. So I got a call to say, would I like to go and join them and help on Honda and Manchester United? So so went over to working into automotive PR in, I guess that was actually, it was a bit later. It was sort of 97. And then never looked back. I love working in the business. It's just fascinating, but it's a small world as well. I mean, particularly in the area of the industry I work in now, but even the normal automotive business, it's such a small world, and it's just full of great people. And I've had a ball since then. So yeah, never look back.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, it sounds like a good space to be in. So what sort of things were you doing when you started out, or preparing like press releases and things like that, or
Yeah,
coming up with ideas of marketing things?
specifically, I mean, I guess what I really did when I started out was in the jungle. It was going out and finding stories of each of the cars that was competing had a nationality. It was a bit like the
Yeah.
World Cup of off-roading, and you just have runners and a group of people trying to find the stories that you could send back to the markets. What I didn't quite work out was that you had competitors from every single part of the world. So Japan, Russia, Ireland, North America, and back round again. So it literally was 24/7 because the markets were. This was way before WhatsApp or emails. So there was basically faxing stories to journalists when they were awake. So it was 24. So I guess that was probably how I cut my teeth in the nitty gritty of PR, really trying to find stories and keep journalists busy and happy. So and then at Jardine's, it was looking at the football sponsorship. So that gave a bit of a broader insight into how a massive football club like Man United could leverage work with Honda, and I got to watch a lot of football. So that then followed over to I moved to Ford at a time where Ford was the Champions League sponsor, and some of your viewers and listeners will know some of the people at Ford. There's some legendary names there, but I was really the only person in the press office that was into football, so I got to host a load of the Champions League matches with journalists. So yeah, I've been quite lucky really really, I guess how much time I've spent in those early days in social, semi sort of social environments with journalists, and that sort of gave me a good basis really for my PR career in automotive.
Yeah, well, you sort of hear, I hear stories from sort of back in the day. Back in the days, not right now, of sort of budgets to do things with journalists that you just can't necessarily get away with now. Did you do any particular fun things with journalists that you'd go, I'm not really sure how this has worked, but yeah, it is.
On the record?
You don't work for these companies anymore.
Yeah.
It was a long time ago.
It was. I mean, it is a cliche, but people of my generation from the industry do shake their heads and reminisce about the good old days of big budgets. I mean, but the nice thing is we had, I moved from Ford to BMW, and both companies, yes, we had good budgets to do things properly, but we used them properly. It wasn't just here's millions of pounds to spend and just enjoy yourself. So, I mean, a couple of good examples. Ford, we launched the Ford Racing Puma over in California. I can't remember which racetrack. We flew British journalists over to California. Principally, the Ford Racing Puma was a fantastic little car, so it was great to launch it on a racetrack. But the reason to do that was because Ford had launched the Puma in the UK. I don't know if you've ever seen this or remember it, but with they took the Steve McQueen shots of him in Bullet, and then cut them into a Ford Puma. I mean, I think at the time it was quite revolutionary. So you had Steve McQueen driving a Ford Puma around the streets of San Francisco. So we sort of built on that and said, well, let's go over to California to launch that car, which, you don't need to launch a Ford Racing Puma in California, but it just adds relevance to what you're doing. And also when we launched the Ford Ranger pickup, that was the sort of relaunch of the Ranger pickup. We drove from Brentwood, Ford's headquarters, all the way down to Spain with 5 cars and 10 journalists, and went to the Champions League final to see Man United beat Bayern Munich, and we went whitewater rafting, and it's quite expensive, but at the same time you're using the car, the truck at the time. It was seen as a lifestyle vehicle for what you hoped people would do with it. So yeah, there was some good budgets around, and it gave you the opportunity to have a lot of fun, but also really push the message on a particular car.
Yeah, and I think like the ones that are done, even if it is insane budget or whatever, it's when it fits with the car and it makes sense, and it doesn't just seem a bit. Just done it because No,
you'd always have to. You'd have to go and justify what you were doing and why you were doing it, and as long as there was a good reason, and at the end of the day, you're trying to sell cars, then usually they got through. The ideas got through, and a good press office, good PR people, they're there to come up with creative ideas. I mean, that's the whole point, really. And you're not buying space like advertising agencies or marketing people. You're actually looking to persuade journalists, editors to fill their pages with your stories. So it works on both ends. At BMW, and I think they still do it, the press office there, we started a program that the last group of journalists on a launch was called the Drive Back Group. And we even had that if we went to North America. I mean, you couldn't drive back, obviously, from North America, but we had extended time in the car. And that group was always the first group to be filled. And it was literally, here's the car, here's the keys, here's some cash to get you through the tolls and some accommodation, send us the receipts, and just let us know when you're bringing the cars back. And, that filled more space in magazines than just a simple, normal test drive would on a launch. So, yeah, I think... And I think, the good old days, as you called them, are probably gone now. Budgets are so much tighter. And people, I guess this is environmental responsibility as well. If you don't need to fly around the world, There's was it Andrew Frankel who's got a really famous story about a press launch for the Mazda MX-5 where they flew to Hawaii, and he said he spent more time in the airplane than he did in the car. I think, that's taking things to excess. So.
Many a story like that.
Yeah.
Where you go, I think even now, something like a Ferrari launch, I imagine there's American journalists that will fly from somewhere in America to Italy, to Maranello, and they will get 5 laps in the car.
Yeah.
Or, something like that.
And they'll give it 10 out of 10.
Yeah, exactly, because they want to come back. But I think even on that point, on the sort of the drive at home group, I know the people that sort of I'm around and surrounded with, and most of the journalists I've spoken to, they just want to drive the car and sort of use it. And if it's someone like Top Gear, well, they probably want to do an interesting story with it relative to the car, maybe. No one really wants to just go somewhere with another 50 people doing exactly the same thing and drive it in really restricted situations that are nothing like their home market or what you might use the car for and all that. I think it must be different depending on the size of manufacturer. If you're a huge manufacturer, you probably work with lots of different news outlets and stuff like that, because you've worked with big companies and then now smaller, more boutique companies. Presumably the budget's not the same. You're not going to invite everyone and anyone. I guess that's an interesting question itself. How do you decide who to invite?
Well, but I mean, where we are now at Praga, and budgets are minuscule compared to the big car brands, and there's nothing wrong with that, because actually it focuses you on making the best use of that time and money, and I think the YouTube generation now has changed to actually the benefit of smaller brands, because with interesting stories. When we were planning the first drives of the pre-production prototype of the Praga Bohema Hypercar that we launched at the end of last year, we've got one test car, and we could afford a couple of days on the track at Dunsfold. So nowhere glamorous, but we worked with Ben Collins, so there's a nice link to get Ben along, and so you can only fit in a small number of media, but we got some media along, but also I think we topped it out at sort of 4 or 5 YouTube folks to come along, and I had a very interesting chat with one of them. So Tim Burton, Shmee drove we actually got Tim down to Slovakia Ring, where the car was testing a couple of weeks beforehand, because we had Roman Grosjean there with us, and Tim quite liked the idea of a few laps with Roman. And I was chatting to Tim's manager and Tim about this, and I think what they said at the time really came to pass, in that if you just limit it to 4 or 5 YouTubers, for want of a better phrase, you actually get more impact than if you had 20, because nobody can sit and watch 20 YouTube films of a car. So if you just really distill it down to the top 4 or 5, the chances are that everybody who's interested in your car will watch all 4 or 5. So there's, it's a cliche, but less is more. And so I think, it has, there's great opportunity now for smaller brands to have an impact at a similar level to the big brands. Now, we're really lucky because the Bohema is an amazing car, so it has attracted quite a lot of attention anyway. So, I
think that's 100% right. I know Tim quite well, and I know he's always fighting to sort of get something different from everyone else. But everyone kind of wants that. But if you limit it, it's beneficial for you. Costs less money, less time, whatever, all that stuff. But then also, if only 4 people or 3 people or whatever it is, a very small number, do something with the car, then there's no options. When someone wants to watch a video about that car and it's come out, There's only three, like you said, and then those will get all the possible viewers will watch those ones. They'll get more views, and then consequently they'll get pushed to a significantly larger number of people.
Yeah, and as long as it's positive, then you're laughing. So it's, that's the risk. If you only do 4 or 5 and it doesn't go well, then there's your challenge. I suspect, I think Mercedes AMG with the Chris Harris thing is probably a good example where they probably only got a handful of people in, and it didn't go massively well for them that day. But and immediately you're quite high profile there as well. So swings and roundabouts. But I think, as I said earlier, it small budgets, small limited assets, one test car, it really focuses your attention on what's the essence, what's the core of what you're trying to say about the car, who are the best people to get involved in that, and it focuses your attention, and which ultimately gets you close to the customer and what they're looking for. So it's no bad thing to have limitations on these things. I'd rather have 4 test cars and 5 times the budget, but when you're small and startup, it's good to be focused.
Yeah, I've noticed over the last, I don't know how long, you'll be able to tell me, you've worked quite closely with a few YouTubers of all sorts.
Yeah.
I've forgotten who you've worked with. A few people.
Yeah.
A few people that I've had on the podcast.
Yeah.
Jimmy.
Yeah.
And, what's he called? What's the driver coach called? Driver 61. What's he called?
Oh, Scott Mansell.
Scott. Yeah. I know you've had a few of those guys racing.
Yeah.
Was that a sort of, I think a lot of people are put off getting people in this sort of YouTube space, and I know you did how did you find those people, and how, was that difficult to sort of put together in the first place? Yeah,
well, so you have to go back a couple of years to, I joined Praga to really launch the Bohema Hypercar, to build the business ready for that, because I went to see the company, I saw the prototypes, they were amazing. I really loved the concept of them, going back to genuine lightweight technology, all carbon, petrol engine in the back, it's ideal. And I see that the market wanted that. I'd worked with people like Pininfarina and Rimac, amazing cars, but it's a harder sell. A 2,000 kilo, 2,000 horsepower, 2 million pound electric hypercar is a harder sell than a below 1,000 kilo all carbon petrol hypercar. So I really liked the idea of working with them. Now, when I went to see them, they liked the idea of me working with them as well. So they got me going, but I knew the hypercar was 2 or 3 years away. So we needed to build the brand, because even though Praga is a very old car brand that's had 115 years plus of unbroken business, nobody knows about them. It's one of the great undiscovered car brands, really. And so we need to raise the brand profile ready for when we launch the hypercar, so that at least when people Google Praga, they see the full story. So the best way to do that is through the motor racing, through the R1 race car that had been going for, we've sold quite a few now, mostly in America. But again, there's low levels of awareness on the R1. But we had these conversations with the owner, and ultimately, to cut a long story short, he said to me one day, "Look, let's force a one-make race series onto the market. There's good interest in the car in the UK. One-make race series don't happen overnight by themselves. So if I send you 5 factory cars, this was for the season before last, if I send you 5 factory cars to get going on a one-make race series, can you find 10 people to race them who have have a presence to help raise the profile of the brand? So let's call them influencers. Can you find 10 influencers to race 5 cars that you have 2 drivers per car?" So I said yes, absolutely, and put the phone down, and then thought, oh shit, what do I do now?
Can anyone drive?
I've worked, BMW, McLaren. I've worked at brands. I've worked with motor racing. I've never worked in motor racing directly. So I didn't. So I then thought, well, we need a mix of people. I'm not a sim racer at all, but I know the history of, there's a little bit of sim racers moving to real racing.
Yeah.
We thought, who are the racing drivers that are around the place who have got a bit of a profile? We wanted different audiences for each of the driver, and we just, things just really fell into place. You make your own look, but so, Charlie Martin joined us, transgender racing driver, who's got a profile through her racing, and is a good driver and a great person as well. James Walker, Mr. JWW, came on board. Jimmy Broadbent, Jay Morton from SAS, Who Dares Wins. I know his manager. So it really was just sort of going round, and every time I picked up the phone to someone, they said, "Well, yeah, I'd love to race a car." And with Jimmy and Jay, it was, well, I've never raced a car before, but I'd love to give it a go. And I said to a few people, I've got this guy, Jimmy Broadbent. I had no idea who Jimmy was. Somebody much younger than me had recommended him. I was saying to people, I've got this guy, Jimmy Broadbent racing. They looked at who he was, and they were just, are you really sure you know what you're doing? But I think ultimately, I met all these people face to face, looked them in the eye. First of all, I said, there's a season for you to come racing with us, which is a great offer to somebody. We didn't pay anybody. Everybody was, the deal was you get to race for a season and
That's
work
worth a
with
lot.
us. Yeah, exactly. And you look Jimmy in the eye, you look Jay in the eye. They're both very different people. One's an ex-SAS and one's a sim racer. But the key thing is you can just tell. You can tell they're serious. It's a serious little racing car. So, with all due respect to someone like Caterham, this isn't like saying to somebody, "Do you want to go and race a Caterham for a bit?" It's you've got
it's not.
a downforce aero car. You've got to race, to not embarrass yourself. You've got to engage the aero, which takes nerve, and they all knew that. And the sort of no-brainer in this really is that they've got their own audience, they've got their own fans. Jay's got a big Instagram following, Jimmy's all over YouTube. If they mess it up, they're going to look really stupid to their fans as well. So they've pretty much got skin in the game in it. And so you worked on that logic that if they're up for it, then they're taking it seriously. So so we populated the 5 cars and on the whole it went really well. I mean, to the point now, Jimmy came back last season. Jimmy won Rookie of the Year first season, came back last season and won the championship and was the top amateur driver, and has now bought his racing car so that he can race again this year. Because we're not putting factory cars in there. We're focusing all our attention on the hypercar.
Yeah.
So Jimmy's actually bought his car to go racing again, which is just fantastic actually. That it's gone through that process over 3 seasons now. So it was.
I think his one particularly resonated with me and I think it does with a lot of people that have got. Well, you'll be able to see behind me. I've got a sim set up, but there's tons and tons and tons and millions and millions and millions of young people and older people, but young people who have like aspirations of being a racing driver, and the closest they can sort of get is playing sim stuff.
Yep.
And like Jimmy is 100% that person, like absolute fanatic, loves everything about it. Did all the sim stuff, built this YouTube channel, and then for him to get the opportunity to go and race something, especially like the Praga, like you're not messing around. Is just a really cool story, and then sort of watching that develop.
Yeah, and he he took it so seriously. He wouldn't mind me saying this. We fell out a couple of times at race weekends, and it was simply he had a racing driver's head on, and I was sort of politely reminding him that, well, yes, but it's, in my mind, you're an influencer. This is, we're in this to basically, to cut to the quick, to raise the profile of the brand. And you can't knock him for putting the racing driver head on. You've got to have a racing driver's head on at a race weekend. Otherwise, bad things happen.
Well, things get wrong.
Yeah. So, we laugh about it afterwards, but we were reminiscing actually when he came up here a couple of weeks ago to take the car away. It was the 2nd round or 3rd round. So really early on in the first season, it was biblical rain at Snetterton, and there were experienced racing drivers packing up and going home because it's not the best place anyway when it's wet and lots of standing water, and it wasn't letting up. And we took all the 10 drivers aside in one big meeting and said to them all, do not race. If you do not want to race, don't race. It's just not worth it. It'll cause damage to our cars as much as anything else, but worse things could happen. And everybody was up for it. Jimmy especially, and Jimmy said he was absolutely scared witless when he went out. But he just said everybody was going out. I couldn't not go out, and looked after himself. And so hats off to him. That took a lot of nerve, but it sort of crossed a bridge for him to really see that he could do all this. And so it's been great actually to watch these guys do all this. And Jay Morton was the opposite. He was like, yeah, bring it on, and he was spinning all bloody weekend, but he got on the podium. Did he count? Anyway, he would have got on the podium, but spun it again at the last corner or something daft. So, but he was laughing when he got out of the car. What was really good to get to now where we are is that the last race of this last season. So Jay came back for his second season. Jimmy came back. We had Ben Collins racing with Jay, and then Gordy raced with Jimmy as his partner. On the last race at Donington Park, Jay was keeping Jimmy honest, and Jimmy was setting as fast times as some of the pro drivers. So you see these two guys have sort of developed through the 2 seasons to getting to the speed. Jay's a bit unpredictable sometimes in how he drives just because of his nature, but they've both sort of looked at it as a sort of long game of, they never went out expecting to win immediately. Although Jay in his third round was on the winning step twice, so it's been great. It's been good, and it also shows, I think, that certainly the race car, it's a great little car for pro drivers, but also for complete AM drivers as well to step in, because all these guys, Jay and Jimmy and the rest of them, had to do their however many signatures they had to get to race the car. You can't just get your odds and race at an R1. You have to get the certificate to the level you need to be. So it's a good car for novices to jump in as well and learn about aero. So that's been the really nice thing to see, that the AM drivers, the influencers, have got up to speed with some of the pros.
Yeah, I remember talking to James before he was going to drive. Or no, maybe he was about to drive. I feel like his first drive in the car was at like Donington, and it was cold and horrible, grim. And he was like, I've never driven anything like this. I think it was on slicks or whatever.
Yeah.
And that that is a big step, like going from other stuff. Like James, I know he'd done some caterums and he's driven lots of things, but he's not driven anything like that. What is actually? Let's just run through what that car. What is that car? The R1. Like, it's a small little prototype type thing.
Yeah. So, well, there's the sketch behind, but yeah, single seat, all carbon, carbon tub, carbon body, 2-litre Renault Alpine engine. We run it at the moment at 365 horsepower. You can run it at 385 over an endurance race. That stretches the car a little bit, but it can go at 385. We tried all we could last year in the one make race series to make sure people didn't do that. Keep it at 365. in the States where guys race them, they're tuning them to 420, 450. It's crazy, but
really?
Because it's only 635 kilos. So and actually the ones in America, most of them are lighter than that, because that is the Gen 5 car, which is a little bit heavier. So yeah, these guys are really pushing them in America. So simple concept, closed roof, and it's there as a great, almost a great step into aero downforce racing, because in essence, with it's being a closed roof, it's sort of GT type car. But then you've got the aero and the downforce, and you have to get on into that, otherwise you could just get left behind. And if you don't engage the aero and downforce, then you go off, frankly, at the corners that need aero and downforce. So yeah, that's the essence of the car. It's struggled over the years in being accepted, and that's partly because we'd have, a car would turn up and beat into a mixed category race and beat the GT3s and GT4s, and those guys would get upset and tell the organisers, well, that shouldn't race, it's a prototype, and then it would go against the prototypes and beat them, and they'd say, well, no, it's not a prototype, it's a GT car because it's got a roof. So it's been, as a car, it's been pushed around. Well, what I really love about the guys at Praga is they're really just straight racing people, engineering people, and also there's a little bit of naivety there. So they designed that car because they wanted to design the perfect little racing car, but they didn't design it to any FIA regs. They didn't design it to any regs. They just did what they wanted to do, and then thought, right, now we'll work out how we sell it. So it's taken a few years to get going, but I think we're seeing now that certainly with introducing a hypercar into the brand and everything else that the brand does, actually it's now quite interesting for race organisers to think, well, it'd be quite nice to have Praga along. So we're seeing quite an uptick in interest in the car as well around the world. So it's I think I can see real growth with the race car, and also in America where we're taking quite a lot of orders now for just track toys. So the guys who've got condos at the motorsport parks, there's a little gang of 4 of them actually ordered cars just before Christmas. So we've got 4 cars that are heading over there in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So it's perfect for something like that, because if they've been driving a Radical or a Caterham for the last few years at their motorsport park, this is a good little car just to almost take to the next level. So and it makes
perfect sense for that sort of situation. Like the reason I got into Radicals was I had some nice road cars. I started taking them on track, and then you're like, okay. And then I was like, I want to do a bit of racing, but I wanted something that was different to the road cars.
Yeah.
And like, it's kind of why I'm not that interested in GT racing. Like, you then start getting the cost thing, and it all gets a bit warped. But a prototype is a fundamentally different driving experience to a heavy GT car, and they are heavy and like significantly heavier in comparison. And you look at something like a Praga or a Radical or that sort of thing, and you've got tons of downforce, literally, and it's such a different driving experience. So I can see why, if you've got all the road cars, and even if you've done a bit of racing and whatnot, you go, well, if I'm driving on track, I might as well drive something that's really good on track and light and doesn't use much consumables, and we'll just hammer around all day long.
Yeah, we've got we launched the hypercar in the United Arab Emirates at the end of last year, and we've got a really good partner over there in Dubai called Dragon Racing, who are based at the Autodrome, and Dragon are the best in the business over in the Middle East for running race cars and track day cars. I think they run about 30 Ferrari Challenge cars now, and they came on board with us last year and bought a car for one of their customers, and Ian, and what he really likes about it, we caught it. Well, he liked the fact that the first race he went out in last year he won, which was quite nice. But he really likes the idea. There's a sort of purity to the race car that it's really predictable in tyre wear, in its performance, because it's lightweight. So you can really analyze your lap times really well. You can make up seconds around a track, then you can make up tenths of seconds and really start to work on your abilities as a driver. Whilst we were over there launching the car, Ian had a couple of days with Rob Weldon, who raced with Raw Motorsport last season with us, and Rob and Ian were 2 days in front of laptops just taking off tenths, and I think that's one of the things that really appeals about the R1 is that ability to hone your abilities as a driver.
Yeah, that's something that I think is not necessarily underappreciated, but I think not necessarily known about that much, is like the data side of driving a car. Is where you do most of your learning.
Yeah.
Like, okay, someone can sit next to you, but if someone sits next to you, the car's got another 70 kilos in it and it drives different. And then, they can watch a video and you can see a reasonable amount from a video, but it's when you start lining up traces next to each other and stuff that you really start to go, okay, you're braking like this and you need to brake like this, and shapes of curves and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and especially on a downforce car, because it's all in the corners. And so, entry, exit, and speed you're having taken through the corners is everything. If you can keep it flat through a corner, then the aero kicks in and it just pushes you on. So I think, that ultimately that's where you make up your time, and that's the beauty of a downforce car is really focused on the corners. So, you can really work the data well.
Yeah.
I sound like I know what I'm talking about in motorsport, don't I? It's great. We need to talk about this hypercar at some point,
yeah,
please.
let's talk about the hypercar. So the Bohema, where did the name come from?
I don't know, a year or 2 years ago, I was presented with a list of about 50 different names that the guys at Praga had come up with over the time.
Yeah.
And I quickly went through the 50, crossed 47 of them out, and kept 3. I can't remember what the other 2 were, but Bohema was one of them. And on a very simplistic level, most hypercars are 3-syllable words ending in A. Wire, Miura, you can go on and on. Regira.
Yeah.
So there's logic, if you come up with a 3-syllable word ending in A, people have their views on whether they like the name or not. So far, it's resonated really well. And also, but the region that the company's based in, Czech Republic, Slovakia, that was historically the region of Bohemia in Central Europe. So there's a little link to where we come from. The people are very proud of their heritage in that part of the world, and the heritage in motorsport and engineering. It's a real hotbed, and you can see now most modern manufacturers, they use a lot of carbon fiber shops down there. That part of the world now is a great place to be engineering and developing cars. So we've picked a name that references that. I also really liked as well, I like the sort of idea of being a bit bohemian, in a sort of, it's somebody who's a little bit on the edge, on the side of things. It's sort of quite a creative thing to be bohemian. It's so there was a bit of play over there, but yeah, there's some stories behind the name like that, but ultimately, if the car's good, the name's good. Basically, I know that from when I was at Ford. I was part of the team that launched the Ford Focus, and when we announced the name Focus, Escort had changed to Focus. It just caused uproar. It was that. Generally, the reaction was, that is the most stupid name for a car I've ever heard. Well, if the car's great, which it was, people suddenly forget their problems with the name, and that first generation Ford Focus is a legendary car now. So suddenly Focus becomes a great name. So yeah, I was also part of the team that selected MP412C for the first McLaren supercar, and that's probably one to forget. But that one didn't quite work.
No, I remember I saw somewhere on someone's phone some pictures early days. I think actually, no, it was the same day that you were showing the car to people behind some closed doors. I think at a supercar driver meeting.
Oh, yeah.
And thinking, ooh, this looks juicy. And that is actually, I thought that was my first impression of seeing the car. It looks cool. Like, you see a lot of cars launched these days that are don't look quite right. They look a bit weird. Something's not going on, and then they'll tell you some excuse or some fact or whatever, and you're like, yeah, but it doesn't look good. Whereas this, you can see the Praga side of it, and then it's some mad supercar.
You can clearly see the family resemblance to the race car. There's zero carryover. There's nothing on the road car is on the race car, and vice versa. So it gives us, there's a language coming through, but it's language based on aerodynamics.
Can we run through some of the specs of it? So is it a carbon tub?
Everything's all carbon tub, carbon body, a lot of carbon.
And then what does it weigh?
Less than 1,000 kilos. So we're targeting 982 kilos.
Right.
That's wet without fuel.
That is super light.
It's phenomenal. When you're looking up to see the car, if you hear the stats, you hear less than 1,000 kilos, road legal race car, you immediately think, well, it must be stripped out, and it's not. I can't quite work out how the engineering director and the design director have done what they've done, because the interior is a beautiful place to sit. The quality is fantastic. The materials are fantastic, but it's super lightweight. The interior structure itself is super lightweight. So they've done an amazing job to get the weight below 1,000, and the benefit is there. And then how it drives around a track. We're targeting GT3 lap times on semi-slicks, but also on the road. It's a massive benefit for us to be putting a 982 kilo race car on the road, because again, you assume this thing's going to shake your fillings out and be awful on road, because race car on road should be awful. But the fact it's so light just gives you so much opportunity to work on the suspension and the compliance. Again, it's about what I said about the race car. It's about predictability of engineering, predictability of performance. If you can just give you that solid predictability in what you're doing, it allows you to tune the car for both road and race. So, a guy called Uri Mitro is the design director, and Jan Martinek is the engineering director, and they've done an amazing job, actually. And they've also, I think, on the styling as well is really important, because, as you say, it looks good. And they've been really focused on pure aero design, but not at the lack of visual beauty, if you like. Yeah. So Uri and Jan have worked hand in hand, day to day, so that to add some elegance into the styling, but without removing the performance from the aero. So I'm biased, but I think it works.
Yeah, no, I think it does. And so, is it designed to be heavily track focused, or also like actually reasonably okay on the road? Or
yes to both of those. But yeah, it's I mean, really, the starting point is our heritage at the moment, is performance on track, on dirt if it's Dakar, on track with go-karts. So Praga's the third biggest go-kart chassis manufacturer in the world through its various different brands. So there's a race mentality, and the essence to the car came when we had the R1 race car, and the company said, well, let's see if we can do a road legal version of the race car. This was 2015, 2016. And some of your viewers and listeners will know the R1R, which was the road legal prototype of the R1. It burned really brightly for a very short period of time.
It came on a road trip.
Yeah. Oh, right. Okay, you're on the right. Yeah, so up to Sweden or
in the snow.
Yeah. Which amazing. So we proved that we could make a road legal version of a race car. Now the problem is commercially, if picking a number, let's say that car would have been on sale at €250,000, you'd have to make a lot of them. You'd have to have a global network. You'd have to. And I think the owner at the time said, great, we've got a road legal version of a race car, but if we put that into business, it'll kill us overnight. But we don't want to kill the project. It's proven we can do it. Now, ironically, the more you can charge for a car, the fewer you have to build, and the easier it is, in theory, to build a business from that, because you don't need a global network of dealers. You can look after customers individually. So that was the vision at the time, was, well, let's see if we can push this concept of a road legal race car to the hypercar market, make the car bigger, full two-seat, much higher quality, and that's where we are today. So yes, first and foremost, this is a road legal race car, but then to justify the price point, to justify the position in the market, it has to be available for anybody who wants to drive it on the road, whether that's from Silverstone racetrack to Silverstone Village and back, or whether it's from your home in on the south coast to Silverstone, or these sorts of road trips. It shouldn't really matter. So we're working really hard on the compliance of the car. So far, it's good. Everybody's driven in the car on the road has reported really positively back. The visibility is really good for obviously front through the sort of wraparound screen, but then the wing mirrors, which are huge on these huge side stays, provide really good visibility. But also, there's people have seen there's 2 side pods in the rear 3/4 arches. With bespoke luggage. So there's luggage space for a night away, a weekend away if you pack lightly. So, or luggage space for your helmet and your boots. So yeah, we're hoping to nail both sides of it. If there's compromise, it will be on the road. There's going to be no compromise with the car's performance on track. That's our focus, but. You can't have both, and it's the opposite with most road legal track cars are road cars first and then engineered for the track. So there's compromises there on both sides, because you're then compromised on the road because you made a track car, but you're massively compromised on track with the weight and where you've started from. So it's
if anyone has run a track special road car, maybe a Ferrari or whatever, and actually done some serious track miles, they'll realize quite how expensive it is to run. And how much abuse running a car like that, whatever it is, 1,500 kilos on a track day or that sort of thing, multiple times a year. Discs, brakes, stuff just starts falling apart after not that long.
Well, that's interesting, because we for the tyres, the tyre choice on the Bohema, and we've seen this with the R1 race car, the tyre wear is minimal, which comes down to weight. But we're working with Pirelli now, so the tyre choice is Pirelli, and it wasn't because we chose the brand we wanted to work with. It was we went through all the different options, all the different possible tyres, and the Pirellis just never gave up. They just ran and ran and ran for lap after lap after lap, and actually Jan, the engineering director, he can't put his finger on why. It was just night and day from every other single option. And so you've got that total predictability in what's going to happen to your car on track when you're working at lightweight and aerodynamic. It's going to be fantastic for people to take the car on track, actually.
And the engine choice, I thought it was quite an interesting one. I guess fundamentally, you've got to buy an engine that's made. You're not making your own engines. So that's somewhat limiting. Do you know what led to this particular engine choice? And what is the engine choice?
I mean, I guess one option always is you can develop your own engine. I mean, very few of what are supposedly bespoke engines in hypercars and supercars are actually there's always a foundation where they come from, but the car would be double the price point and have way more complications and problems if you developed your own engine. We can see that in the market at the moment. So my understanding of where the engine came from is that Praga has known Ian Litchfield for quite a long time. And in a conversation about the powertrain, just the idea of the Nissan GTR came up. And I think at the time, I think it was a case of, well, there's no way Nissan are going to let us do that and let us take their pride and joy. There were one or two other options on the table that were discussed. But I think through the relationship with Ian, it gave Nissan some confidence that this would be a good thing to do. And that's where we are. It's and the nice thing is it means we'll continue working with Litchfield on developing the engine, after sales on the powertrain, and I would be very surprised if one or two customers don't take the car to Ian and ask for more than 700 horsepower.
Well, I think that was going to be my follow-up question, because we know what they do at Litchfield, and they turn GTR engines into high horsepower things.
I wouldn't recommend it, but I'm sure people will do it. No, seriously though, so we're aiming for the aerodynamic package on the car to be honed for more than 700 horsepower, because we know some people will. There'll be a point, we're probably starting with number 8, where we would recommend additional aero performance is involved, and we're looking at how we can support that with something like a track pack or an aero pack, whatever you want to call it. And the reality is that if you can take a bit of weight out of the car even further from 982, that it's absolutely conceivable that a 1-to-1 power to weight ratio car could be looked at by clients. I suspect he'll just take it to Ian and he'll just plug in his laptop and there you go. So which is really exciting. I just really like the fact that we're not too precious to respect that of a number of the 89 owners of the car will want to do these sorts of things, and why not? So whether it's tuning the engine, whether it's working with people on their lap times on track, whether it's the fact we're working with 89 customers, some of the 89 will put the cars into storage and never see the light of day, but we can build relationships with each of these customers on whatever level they want. So and that's where people like Litchfield are great, because they're just really focused on how they work with their customers and bespoke work. So it's it's
that's
exciting.
quite cool, because I've not really seen that level of, I know it's not necessarily direct integration on that level. I guess you wouldn't necessarily link it. You wouldn't go, well, this is a person that exists and they do the engine and we know they do this other stuff. You'd never really see that from another manufacturer. It's always like, maybe you'd get like a Brabus or whatever, which is sort of a kind of a sort of thing. But it's interesting that you're going to work together and go, well, someone's going to give it more horsepower because, why not? Just to try it out. Yeah. So let's factor that in.
Yeah, and the beauty of it is that most of our clients will have or have had a Nissan GTR anyway as a daily runner probably. So, there's one gentleman we presented the car to that's interested, who's got a whole collection of GTRs over the years. So, and we had a very small group of guys over at Hockenheim back in October, I think, came to see the car, and one big car collector turned up, and he hadn't done his research into what we were doing, but we told him the engine, and he said, "Oh, great! Guess what? I just turned up in my Nissan GTR." So everybody loves that car. It's bomb-proof as well. So loads of positives around the engine, and then to sort of. We've got a Hewland Racing gearbox that we've adapted so that it'll be more compliant on the road, but still do the business on the track. So if you take Hewland, you take the Nissan GTR engine, Litchfield, you take Pirelli, the pieces of the jigsaw really fit really nicely around then the bespoke Praga design and engineering of the body, the chassis. So it as a package, I think it's really appealing.
What's it like at low speed? Has it got a clutch pedal at all?
Yeah.
Anyway.
So it'll be fully automatic. So it would be 2 pedals. So there'll be no concerns with people, struggling to set off from outside the casino or down the pit lane. It's going to be really smooth. So that's really important as well. That there's a bit of drama getting in and out of the car. You don't want drama when you're setting off as well.
Yeah. And reverse, it's not like a weird procedure. It's just reverse and off you go.
Yeah. One click.
Yeah, because that's something that we sometimes see with kind of funny, whether dog box, sequential type boxes, where it gets a bit funny. And I think for a road car, it's a car that's going to be used on the road by most people. They don't want to be things you'll accept at a track. You don't accept on the road.
I mean, it'll be it's the polar opposite of somebody will park at their Praga Bohema next to their Koenigsegg Jesko or whatever, and it's the polar opposite, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's the beauty of it, I think, in that the Koenigsegg is full of incredible technology, real groundbreaking stuff that they're still working on as they're taking orders, which is amazing. And doors and bonnets and boots all going up at the same time and dancing, and our car is just really simple, straightforward concept. And there's it does fill a niche. If there was no niche to fill, there'd be no point in doing this car. And there is a niche for the sort of car we're presenting that I think will make sure it fits really well inside car collectors' lineups and garages. So, and the other nice thing as well is that at this point, at this level of the business, we know people at Koenigsegg, we know people at Pagani, we know people at these brands, and because it is a super small world up there, and Gordon Murray in places, and the nice thing is all these guys are sold out years in advance, so we're not seen as much of a threat, I don't think, which is nice. Certainly when we launched the McLaren 12C, we were seen as a threat by our competitors, which is an added complication to doing business. But no, we've got some of the best luxury and supercar dealers around the world wanting to work with us, and at the volumes we're selling, there's no business for them there, but it's just an interest in what we're doing that sits alongside their other supercars and hypercars. So we launched at the end of last year, and I think we're all feeling optimistic about where we're going with this.
Well, how many are you going to make, and what do they cost?
We're going to make 89. That is based on that in 2022. It was 89 years since Praga won a road race in what was Czechoslovakia, called the 1,000 Miles of Czechoslovakia. So we were always looking at a number below 100. We were just throwing some numbers around, and this sort of anniversary came up, and it's when I talk to people, the guys at Octane or Magneto, a place like that, and which are these are magazines that are bought by our prospective clients, and it's lovely to have a sort of story behind a number. That might change, I think, because it's the 90th anniversary this year when we actually bring the car to market. So maybe we'll have to do a 1-to-1 at the end as a 90th car. But 89 cars. The current price is £1.1 million plus taxes. It's bought direct from the factory. So that's $1.28 million in euros. It'll increase in price each year, just the way of the world at the moment. Everything's increasing in price, so we'll have a small uplift halfway through this year, but that's the current price point of the car.
And what should be, assuming they all sell out and whatever, how long do you think you'll make it for? How long will it take to make those
production
cars?
will continue into 2027. We're being very conservative about how many cars we build each year. And the most important thing is that there's no point in building 12 cars and having all 12 cars sitting there being reworked and at the end of the production line. So we're maximum 20 cars a year. When we get going this year, we'll produce less than 10. We're going to make sure that they're absolutely perfect, as perfect can be. Relatively slow. So we'll go through to 2027, and then see what's next after that.
See what's next.
So what a typical journalist question when we show them the car. What's next?
I'm not going to ask what's next. I can make some guesses about things. We've talked about some things that might happen. Who knows? There might be a convertible at some point. Everyone makes a convertible. And then I guess actually because the GTR, you can't buy the GTR now, can you?
No. That's certainly not in its form. I mean, I'm sure the brand will be there, the badge will be there, but that's it.
Back.
Yeah.
I think they've said they're going to make another one.
Yeah. It'll probably be hybrid, I think, won't it? So,
who knows?
So I mean, that's the good relationship with Litchfield is that we've got connections we've got a relationship with the performance division at Nissan anyway, right up to the top table. The engine was signed. Our use of the engine was signed off right at the top at Nissan. So there's a good relationship there, and even better through the fact that we'll do it through Litchfield as well. So it's good to know that there's that relationship.
Yeah, and your powertrain's pretty secure. Like getting hold of 90 GTR engines, I imagine, is not particularly challenging, unlike some other engines that get used in these sorts of things. Yeah. Well, I normally wrap these up with 5 questions. You ready?
Yeah, I don't know.
What's your most memorable driving trip or journey?
So, we talked about the BMW drive backs. I drove back from south of France in the Z3 Coupe, the Breadmobile. One time we tried to take, if we did a car launch, we tried to take 2 or 3 of the heritage cars along that had relevance to what was being launched, and the Z3 Coupe was just sitting there, and I just loved that car, so I bagged that one. That was great. It's not the best car to drive from the south of France to England over one night or something, but it was great fun.
Yeah, on the motorway.
Yeah, and then it's BMW still was. I got to drive the BMW M1 on the road. I've got a friend who's driven it on track who winds me up about that, but but that was just from the offices in Bracknell. We used to do a drive out. We'd get journalists along with the heritage fleet and drive out to a pub. 20, 30 miles away.
Nice.
It took a while to get in it, and the driving position's awful, and the pedals are offset terribly. I'm nearly 6'4", so it's impossible. But you know how these things are once you're in, and that was a memorable experience. The most memorable car I never drove was Nick Mason's F1 GTR. I was at Dunsfold once, and we were just doing something with McLaren, obviously, and it came up in conversation that I'd never driven an F1, and he just handed me the keys. Are you joking? He said, no, go on, you'll be fine. And we had to get on with doing other stuff. And an hour later, the clouds rolled in and the heavens opened, and he just politely asked for his car keys back. So I've still never driven a McLaren F1.
So close. But you had the keys.
Yeah.
Okay, if you could only drive one car for the rest of your life, and you're allowed like a cheap banger on the side. So like, I don't know if you've got family or whatnot, you can have something super cheap on the side to sort of cover daily duties if needed. So yeah, one car, what would it be?
M3 CSL, easy.
Ooh. And would you do a manual conversion? Is that the sort of thing that you'd be into?
No, I don't think so. I'm too old for that now. I'd stick with the gearbox as it was. But no, I really that car is just it's a car that everybody is just like in love with now. But I remember the days when we launched it. It was a bit of a mess. People thought we'd ordered too many. It was too expensive. They didn't really get it, and we all got it. And I sit with old colleagues from BMW in those days, and we tick off the cars we should have bought at the time. That was one of them. The Z3 Coupe was one of them. All these cars are just. You've just seen what's happened to the prices of them the last few years. So yeah, that would be in my garage.
It's funny that because I feel like this sort of thing did happen. I'm not that old. I'm 35, and I didn't get into cars until relatively late in my life. But I feel like there was a time when I looked at the market and went, "Yeah, but that's a really cool car, and it's not that expensive." And now. I'm saying cars like M3 CSL, maybe. I've got a 997 Gen 2 RS. Cars like that. I don't look at the market now and see anything like that. And I'm like, I want to pick the whatever and like put it away and drive it, but go, yeah, this is a safe bet or anything. And there's nothing like that at the moment, I feel.
Yeah, or in 20 years' time, you'll be saying, I thought there wasn't anything around at the time, but look how that's gone up. I know what you mean. I think
100%.
Yeah, but I think there's a nostalgia thing as well there, isn't there? That era, the 90s, there's some amazing cars that probably weren't appreciated at the time because of all the amazing cars that were from the previous decades, whereas now we're in an era where cars are becoming much more homogenous and less personality to them. It's just the way of the world. So yeah, you're probably right. There's fewer cars now that you can say there's a future classic that'll appreciate in value. But
I guess one way that people normally do it is it's like your sort of formative years, or the years where you're like, you can't afford it, and you're like, that is really cool, and you might have seen one or two around.
Yeah.
And then I think there's probably, if I look back at the cars that stick in my mind for me, are all around 2000, probably 5 to 2012 or something. That was quite like I really started getting into it in that period of time. So there are other cars in that space that I'm like, none of them are cheap.
Yeah, you're right. It's the 25-year-olds becoming 45 and earning the money, and then having the money to reinvest in the cars that they loved back in the day. And so long may it last, because it just fills the back pages of Octane every month, and lets you write down your bucket list of what you want. But
I mean, there's a lot of chat about Peugeot 205 GTIs and stuff like that these days, or Lancia Delta Integrales and things. Very cool. Right.
Yeah.
What do you think? I guess this is a good lead up for that, actually. What do you think is the most undervalued car at the moment? What should be worth more?
Wow. I think I can't remember who I was talking to last week about somebody who's got one of the very first McLaren MP412Cs. And whenever I meet people who've got the original 12C with the swipey door and the
presumably fully replaced by now, every part of the car.
Or the sat-nav that doesn't work. First thing I say is, I'm really sorry. And I tend to find there's people sit in two camps. They either say, my car was a complete disaster. I got locked out of it. I had to smash the window because the battery went flat. There's a whole list of historical known problems. You get another camp of people who say, do you know, my car never missed a beat. I didn't know what the fuss was about. I love it to bits. I've still got it. It's done 48,000 miles. I think, the 12C is probably, I don't know what they're at the moment, but I bet you can get them quite cheap. Just the fact of the rarity value. So I think McLaren made about 1,300 of the first generation of 12C. And those that are still around and running well, because it has lasted, I think there's a really elegant design as well. It's
100%.
So I think that's there. This is one in 25 years' time. Be saying we should have bought a 12C in 2023.
Yeah, I think, and you need the car. A friend of mine has had one, has one now, and has had it for a long time, and he drives it every now and then. He lives in Germany, so it gets the full beans given to it down the autobahn on the way to the office occasionally. But his car, I went in it recently, and you're like, that car is still mental now.
Yeah. The performance is fantastic, and the trick suspension system, that the integrated linked suspension system, it blew people away when we launched it. Literally, I'll never forget. We did a preview of the car with 20 or 30 journalists at Portimao, and it was the first time they'd done most of them. I thought all of them had been to Portimao, and the jaws were literally dropping at the compliance of the car, the suspension of the car around the track, and then at the time there was a really crappy old road went down to the coast from the racetrack. As a piece of engineering and ergonomics, actually interior ergonomics is fantastic. A piece of engineering, it was amazing. It was just lots of problems with software and glitches like that, but I'd imagine most of the glitches and things are probably, if you've got one that's been around, I would imagine they're probably ironed out now. But
yeah, if one's been, the bills, I saw some of the the bills for some of these cars. If you owned a 12C, generally it would go back for some work. That seemed to happen. And I remember someone looking at running one out of warranty. And actually my friend, I don't think, he doesn't have a warranty on his anymore. But for the first couple of years, it was like 15, 20 grand a year in stuff getting replaced. But presumably by now, if it still runs and it's been driven till now, most stuff will have gone through the cycle and
Yeah, and
doing
there's more
bits.
and
I mean,
more
look cool.
private, out of the McLaren network,
Yeah,
places that will look after cars that probably more sensible prices. But
yeah. No, they're very cool. What's the most interesting car to you at the moment? What are you googling? What are you looking up?
um, I I'm really interested in the Zinger. Um, I was I had a very light touch involvement a couple of years, 2 or 3 years ago in a little project around that, and I think you've had Jens Sverdrup on your
Yep.
program before. I know Jens really well, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. I'm not sure at the moment. The dream of what was promised is quite there. They seem to have gone more back towards a sort of let's deliver a performance car, but I'm sure it is this whole
Yeah.
look at how do you manufacture a car with a much lighter touch. Um, I think that's amazing. I really hope that comes off because it's what they're trying to do is pretty incredible, and the car looks super cool. I mean, it's hands down.
The
So
the
I think that's
manufacturing on that car
yeah.
is so cool.
Well, I think
I saw it in London,
yeah,
and just like the engine bay, just looking at the
yeah,
engine bay, and then you start looking at the components, and you're like, oh, the way they've done this is insane. But yeah, I've not really heard anything about the car in the last, I don't know, I feel like 2 years. Like it
yeah,
came out and then
yeah. I
that was
think
it.
yeah, it'd be interesting. It'll either work and change the game, or it'll be one of those things that they make a number of the cars that become iconic as cars in themselves,
Yeah.
but the concept doesn't quite work to move to manufacturing. I mean, it's I was talking to Ben Collins in Dubai actually about the Lucid. Is it Airstream? Is that what it's called? This hugely
The
heavy
latest one, yeah.
electric car that
Yeah,
he's
something,
he's
yeah.
thrown around Laguna Seca and things. And I was just saying that he said the technology on the car is incredible, and we were just having a debate about how in 10 years' time will there be a Lucid car brand around, because it's so hard. You take Zinger, you take Lucid. I mean, Prague to a certain extent, although at least we've got 115 years of history behind us and other irons in fires. But to
Yeah.
bring a brand new car brand to the world, with new technology, everything new, the cost of it, and then you have to deal in the market against established competitors who are out there to kill you.
Yeah.
It's super hard. So I mean, these are all fascinating things in themselves, and I think it'd be interesting to see where those guys go.
It is very interesting. Like the Lucid, I like the sort of concept of it. The same with the Rivian. I think
Yeah.
I'm not really an SUV person, but I think they've built quite a cool thing.
Yeah.
But I do look at those brands and go, yeah, but you've got to make the next step. You've got to get to making 100,000 a year, 500,000 a year, a million a year. Which
Yeah.
you look at Tesla, and we know they were going gangbusters until they tried to do that next jump, and that's when Elon Musk famously slept in the factory to sort of get it all working. But that
you
that was a
ultimately
tough
have to
time, wasn't it?
become a normal car company, and which goes against the original ethos of what you were trying to do. And Tesla is becoming a normal car company with all the things that go into that. So it'd be interesting to see where that leads. But they've done the hard yards now. I suspect they're there or thereabouts. Rivian's really fascinating. I was really lucky to meet RJ Scaringe, who's the founder, just after I left McLaren, and he had it all nailed. I mean, he wasn't a car guy as such, but he ticked every box, and I think clearly the fact that they've had Ford invest in them, Amazon invest in them in the early days will give them that basis. So they'll be around, I'm sure. But it's not easy coming into an industry, and that's where as I say, we're lucky in that we've got an aviation division as well as the karts, as well as the We've got a truck division and all sorts of businesses that mean that the car business itself is not the be all and end all, which again I think gives the company the ability to be really focused on what the car is and not compromise on the car itself. So and
you've sort of got at the moment, I'd say you've got your niche. You're like, we make fast downforce race cars, and now we make a fast downforce road car. Like that works, and you do it in small numbers and that sort of thing.
we can make it lightweight as well, because we can still get the car in with a petrol engine before legislation removes that possibility. And being lightweight is where the company's focused on. And so we talked about what might be next. Well, one thing that might be next is it would have to be hybrid or battery powered, presumably. But we don't know what's next, because that technology will move on at such a pace over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, as electric and hybrid have to be delivered as new cars. You need to develop the battery and motor technology. So by the time we get around to the next car, hopefully there'll be really lightweight opportunities around alternative fuels.
Yeah, it sounds like that's been one of the biggest challenges for people making, let's say, an EV or something like that. That you're like, right, our car's going to come out and you're going for high performance in 3 years' time. You have to guess. You're like, this is where the tech might be. This is what a power pack might look like in 3 years' time when our car's going to come out. But you just don't know yet. And it's changing so fast, which is, I mean, that's a challenge and a half.
Yeah. And it's where, anybody who's delivering a electric powered performance car or luxury car has got that challenge, because the customers know that the technology will move on as their car depreciates in value, or lives its life, not necessarily depreciate, but lives its life. But with the Bohema, it's totally predictable. Everybody knows the technology. Everybody knows what they're getting into. So which I think is where, if you're in the car industry at the moment, you're hanging your coat on pure electric, plug-in electric, then you're a brave man or woman. I think it's there'll be a mix in 10 years' time, and it's going to be fascinating to see where that actually leads. I mean, I think we've seen Toyota seem to be going very, very hydrogen at the moment. So.
Yeah, it sounds like we're going to have a mix. The solution long term is going to be some sort of mix, and probably most day-to-day traffic will be EV and whatever. Yeah. But in the hypercar space, I find it interesting. Like you're saying, you worked with Rimac and Pininfarina. The thing when looking at those cars, I go, okay, well, Rimac basically invented this car, and they've done it. So if I was going to get an all-electric hypercar, that's the one I would get. I wouldn't get someone else's version of the same car. That's sort of my bland way of looking at it. But even then, I don't know yet how many people out there, especially in the car world, are ready. They look at those cars. I don't know how many people go, yeah, but I really want to buy one. And there will be people that will like it, but I feel like there's not that many at the moment.
Yeah,
it's hard to convince them.
I was talking to a Rimac dealer the day or day or two after Chris Harris did the Navira on Top Gear and just did the most amazing burnout and drift. And he said the phone's been off the hook since then. And and I think that's the trick with certainly, if you take the Praga Bohema, if you're buying one, you know exactly what you're getting into. You know exactly what you can do with it.
Yeah.
You know exactly, what your ambition is with it, whether it's to, hone your skills on track or whatever. It's totally predictable. I think with the electric performance cars, it's hard to know. The chances are you probably already own a Taycan or a Model X.
Yeah.
So it's hard to know what am I getting over and above that. And I think that's where these brands have got to work on. And if Rimac are working on, helping people become like Chris Harris in the Navera or Pininfarina. It's much more about the history of the Italian design and the design company and these sorts of things. So it's maybe more of a lifestyle thing. And it's horses for courses. There's niches there for everybody. But I think there's still the question mark over exactly what does a 2,000 kilo, 2,000 horsepower car actually mean to me. The other thing we're finding certainly in conversation is that the amount of choices now in the hypercar market it's never been seen like this before. So everybody who's in the market for a car can afford whatever car they want, pretty much. But you've only got so many weekends in your life. So, you've got to, if you're going to buy £5 million plus cars in a year, you've got to know that you're either buying it for an investment, you'll park it away, or you're going to use it. And there's and if you've got cars that you didn't want to park away in a collection and you wanted to use and they're just sitting there, then it's these guys are as focused on the every dollar as everybody else is. So you've got to make use of your asset at the end of the day. So
and it's got to stand out for some reason. I did actually I saw a video with the Navera yesterday. I can't remember Misha. I don't know Misha. Who's does some videos at the Nürburgring and stuff. And he was driving one, and he drove it on track, and they were talking through some of the tech and he was doing a bit of drifting and stuff. And that you then look at and go, well, I can see this car can do stuff that normal combustion engine cars can't do. So then you're like, right, that's interesting. Yeah. I did an interview with Thomas Yates from McMurtry.
Yeah.
And so the little downforce suction thingy jobber that went up Goodwood Hill super, super fast. And before talking to him, I didn't really understand why it was an interesting car or why it might be an interesting car. And then after talking to him about it and some of the benefits of the fan, basically, you're like, I could see it's very expensive. And it's going to be a track-only car and they might make a road one over. I can see why someone might buy that because no car on the planet can do 2.5 G round a corner at 20 miles an hour at like low speed, but this one can. Or it can do 0 to 60 in like 1.4 or something, those sorts of ridiculous things. Yeah. There's nothing else that can do that. So you go, it's really expensive, but it has a niche. Whereas I feel like the middle end of the market now, there's a lot of turbo V8, now V6. They're all pretty good. It's kind of like just pick your favorite brand. But then that's about it, really. They're all quite similar.
Exactly. You've got to have a niche. And when we launched the 12C at McLaren, there was a niche in the supercar market. There wasn't a supercar that was focused on technology and engineering. If you looked at Ferrari, Aston Martin, Lamborghini at the time, they all had their customer base and their niches. But McLaren came in as this sort of real tech-driven supercar, for better or worse. And there was its niche, and it's the same with the Bohema. There's a niche there for the car we've delivered, and I think with people like Rimac and McMurtry, for those guys, they don't need to sell a huge amount of cars. It's as much about the business to business side of things, where they're developing a technology, whether it's a platform for electric cars or whether it's the fan technology. So the cars almost act as a shop window. Now, if they can sell some on the side, then that's great. But and long may that last if we get Goodwood Festival of Speed runs like we had last year. So
exactly.
We had Max Chilton. We showed the supercar driver secret end of season ball at the end of last year. We presented the Bohema, and Max was there with the McMurtry as well. So that was great fun, actually, having a chat about that.
Yeah, it's a funny little thing. Final question: 5-car garage, unlimited value.
Take the 5 cars we've already talked about from the previous questions. Oh God, yeah. Okay, so a Camel Trophy Land Rover, a BMW M1 CSL. I want a first generation Nissan Micra Mint because that's the car I learned to drive in. And
Okay, nice. Yeah.
I was lucky enough to learn to drive where I lived in South Lincolnshire, where there's lots of straight roads out in the middle of nowhere with great places to get up to all sorts of tricks. So whenever I see, you never see a mint Nissan, first generation Nissan Micra, but whenever you occasionally see one that's not mint, and I think that and actually, it was a really good little, well-engineered car. Actually, it was good fun. Yeah. So one of those top end. I've got a soft spot for Lamborghini at the moment. I don't know what it is, but we were at a dealer in Germany recently, and there was a sort of Kermit green, really nice Huracan, and it's daft because I don't fit in them, but there's just something. I think they're a car of a moment at the now. We'll probably never see the likes of these things again. I think Lamborghini have done an amazing job the last few years, actually. So
I think so.
Yeah. Anything else? One
more.
Some terrible, big, naughty pickup truck, probably. Say a Rivian. Let's have a Rivian in there.
Yeah. No, your thing about the Micra, it's so funny how we have these like memories based around certain cars, and then you see another one and it flashes back.
Yeah.
I have this with Citroen C1s. You see them everywhere. But I did I've done a couple actually, 24-hour races in them. And I look at that car completely differently now. I'm like, that's fun. That's fun on a track. Like,
I was driving that Micra. I lived in a town called Spalding in South Lincolnshire, and I had a couple of friends lived in a little town called Crowland, which was about 10 miles further south. And there was a road off. It wasn't the main road. There was a back road, the B1063, that went along the drain. In Lincolnshire, you have these big drains, which are deadly because they're just steep sides down into water at the bottom. I mean, awful places if you crash. But that was half of the fun. You would drive along the B1063, lots of straights with then kinks to go down it. So that was that's what the Micra reminds me of. And it was, we had a fast, Top Gear leaderboard on who could drive from one to the other fastest. I mean, it's, God, it's awful when you think about if you've got a 17-year-old, 18-year-old kid who's driving a car at the moment. You don't want to think about things like this, but
it's when you look at
harm done.
The stats on driving for young people, and then you think back to driving when you're young, and you're like, yeah, they make sense. Like, young people are idiots.
You couldn't do Spalding to Crowland any faster in a Praga Bohema, I'm sure, than I could do in my Nissan Micra in the day. So it's good memories.
Right,
but I don't advocate speeding, of course, on the road. So
no, don't do it, kids. Well, thanks very much for coming on the podcast.
Nice, absolute pleasure.